and welcome to Rainier View. My name is Erica, and we're so glad you're joining us. It's tempting to think that a new year will leave last year's problems behind us. It won't. Maybe more than ever, we need a fresh look at the simple power available to us in the life and teachings of Jesus. Let's join Pastor Mike as we begin our new series, where we'll be walking through the Gospel of Luke, called Good News for Everyone.
Hey there, this is Mike. Welcome to the year 2021, and I'm going to start with a very serious question. Do you remember what life was like as a 12-year-old? Now, for some of you watching, that's probably not all that far back to remember. If you are a high school student or a college-age person, like 12 years old doesn't seem like that long ago. But for some of us, being 12 was an adventure 20, 30, 40, 50 years or more in the past. But no matter how long ago you were 12, I'm willing to guess that it's an age that you would probably not say was your best year ever. Like if you could look at your whole life and choose the best year of your life, I would be willing to say that nobody watching would say, when I was 12, that was the best year of my life. Why? Because you were in middle school, and middle school is hard, okay? Nobody would call middle school the best years of their life. It just doesn't happen. You know, I was a middle school pastor for a lot of years and saw so many students, hundreds of students come through my ministry, and all middle school students, they're not considered kids anymore. You wouldn't call them children, and nobody in their right mind would call a middle school student an adult. They are so far from adulthood, and so it's just this weird, awkward stage of life that it's just a challenge. And so it feels like everybody is happy just to survive middle school, which is perhaps why the book series Diary of a Wimpy Kid is so incredibly popular. These books have sold over 200 million copies in 56 languages. Just wrap your mind around that right there, that those books have been translated into 56 different languages. Why? Because globally, being a 12-year-old is hard, okay? And so these stories are about this middle school kid, Greg Heffley, and his misadventures with his friends and girls, and life just being hard because you're 12. And so everybody around the world can recognize that. Did you know that for an entire year, Jesus was 12? I bet you didn't know that, but it's true. I don't know about you. I have a hard time picturing in my mind 12-year-old Jesus. What was middle school Jesus like? Like when did Jesus hit his growth spurt? Like, was he one of those kids that like summer is coming and so like school's getting out and he's like 4'7", and then when they get back to school in the fall, like he grew 6 inches during the summer, like, oh my gosh, Jesus, look at how much you grew, it's crazy. Or did Jesus' voice crack when he was going through puberty like everybody else? Like, hey Ma, where's the honey? Ma, I don't think we have any honey left. Where is it? Like, did he go through that? Like, what was Jesus' room like at his home? Did he have like tunics wadded up in the corner? Were sandals thrown all over the place? I mean, what was that like? Now, perhaps even me asking questions like those are offensive to you, that I'm being disrespectful or irreverent towards Jesus. And I assure you that's not what I am trying to do. It's just hard to imagine what 12-year-old Jesus was like, because there's not that many examples of younger Jesus in the Bible. For the most part, the vast majority of the 4 Gospels talk about Jesus' public ministry, a 3-year period that started when he was about 30 years old. But there is one story about younger Jesus, okay, when he was 12 years old, and it's found in Luke chapter 2. So if you have your Bibles or the Bible app on your device, I want you to navigate your way to Luke chapter 2 as we start our brand new series, Good News for Everyone. Now, some of you might be wondering, well, wait, if we're starting a new series today in this book of Luke, why are we starting in chapter 2? Why wouldn't you start in chapter 1? That's a great question. We actually began this journey through the Gospel of Luke back in December with our series Simply Christmas, as we spent the month of December looking at the birth narrative of Jesus. And that brings us to this point right now in Luke chapter 2, where we are going to continue to study the life and the teachings of Jesus. And so good news for everyone. What does that mean? Well, the good news, otherwise known as the gospel, is the news that Jesus came to the earth to set us free from the power of death and sin. And he did that by means of the way that he lived his life, his decision to sacrifice himself and to die on the cross for us, and then his resurrection from the grave, okay? And that is good news, not just for some people, not for a limited number, but it's good news for everyone who believes. And it's good news not only for this life, but for our eternity as well. And so we're going to see in this series how Jesus' entire life is good news for everyone, and we're going to begin by looking at the good news from 12-year-old Jesus. So we're going to be in Luke chapter 2. I'm going to start it in verse 41. Every year, Jesus' parents went to Jerusalem for the festival of the Passover. When he was 12 years old, they went up to the festival according to the custom. After the festival was over, while his parents were returning home, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but they were unaware of it. Thinking he was in their company, they traveled on for a day. Then they began looking for him among their relatives and friends. When they did not find him, they went back to Jerusalem to look for him. And after 3 days, they found him. Okay, whoa. We need to stop right there because we need to address something. The issue that Mary and Joseph were terrible parents. No, I'm just kidding. They weren't terrible parents. Or were they? I mean, they go to this festival, they're heading back home, and they forget their son in the city. It takes an entire day for them to remember that their child isn't with them. Like, that's awful. This is the Son of God they've been entrusted with, and they leave him behind? What is the deal? Well, you need to understand culturally some things to maybe piece it together why this was not as bad as you might think it is. You have to understand in the cultural context, it was normal when families would go to these festivals, they wouldn't just go like their little family of 3. They would travel with numerous other family members, friends, people from the village, and they would kind of travel in caravans there. And normally the women and children would go first, and then shortly afterwards, the men and the young men would follow along. And so what I think happened on the way back is that it was just a miscommunication between Joseph and Mary. Joseph assumed that Jesus was going to go home with Mary. He was going to go with the women and the children. And Mary might have assumed that Jesus, now a young man, was going to go home with Joseph. And so they crossed lines, not the first time that a husband and wife haven't communicated well. But it's not that they forgot Jesus. It's likely that they just forgot who he was supposed to go home with. Okay, that's out of the way. Let's get back to our passage here. Pick it back up in verse 46. After 3 days, they found him in the temple courts, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. Everyone who heard him was amazed at his understanding and his answers. And when his parents saw him, they were astonished. His mother said to him, "Son, why have you treated us like this? Your father and I have been anxiously searching for you." "Why were you searching for me?" he asked. "Didn't you know I had to be in my father's house?" But they did not understand what he was saying to them. Then he went down to Nazareth with them and was obedient to them. But his mother treasured all these things in her heart, and Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. Clearly, Jesus was a unique 12-year-old, probably due to the fact that he was fully God as well as fully human. And in this passage, there is so much that we can learn from Jesus when it comes to our own lives of faith. You know, it's interesting, like when we think of learning from other people, we often think of our peer group, or mostly we think of people who are older and wiser and more experienced of us. Those are the people that we look to when we want to look to somebody's example. But today, I want to encourage you to act like a 12-year-old. Now, not any 12-year-old, okay, but 12-year-old Jesus. And so I'm going to propose 7 ways this morning that you can grow spiritually by acting like a 12-year-old. And please do not waste this opportunity to post the following on your social media accounts. Today, I learned how to act like a 12-year-old in church. Come on, you gotta post that, and preferably attach this message, okay? Attach this video from our YouTube channel or our website and encourage other people to learn how to act like a 12-year-old as well. Okay, all that being said, I want to encourage you to write these 7 things down. Write them down, grab your phone, start typing a note in your phone. You're going to want to hold on to these because it's my hope that in our time today, you will see that even middle school Jesus brings us good news. All right, so let's get into it here. Number 1, be intentional with your family. And what we see in this passage is we see that every year the family would go to this festival of Passover. Okay, and they would head there, and they would have this experience together. And normally there were 3 festivals every year, and it was expected that the men would go. But if you couldn't go, to all 3, if you couldn't afford to make the trip to Jerusalem 3 times a year, you went to Passover. Okay, you would go and you would take the family, and that's kind of what was expected of you. And so you could say, like, well, did Jesus really want to go to this, or was he just kind of drugged with his parents? Did they force him to go? Like, it's not like they could leave their 12-year-old behind, like leave him at home and they're traveling to a different city. Like, only a lunatic would do that. Like, that's ridiculous. And you might think that Jesus didn't have a choice in the matter, but I would argue that this is something that Jesus looked forward to. This was an experience that he went with his parents to, that this was just an incredible thing, that this festival that is rich in tradition and meaning for the Jewish people. And it was going to be something that he was never going to forget. And so I think, even as a 12-year-old, Jesus wanted to go on this with his parents because it was going to create an incredible memory for him with his family. And so I want to encourage us to do the same thing. Follow Jesus' example and make the most of opportunities to make memories with your family that has a spiritual significance to it. Okay, it doesn't have to be a trip to the Holy Land, but try to find things and experiences that your family that you can have, these significant spiritual experiences. All right, let's keep going. Number 2, spend time with people who are hungry for God. So when Jesus is found in the temple, they find him hanging out at church. In the passage, it says after 3 days, they found him in the temple courts. Now, keep in mind, Jerusalem was the Jewish center of the world with upwards of 100,000 people living there. The Roman author, Pliny the Elder, it's a good title. So Pliny the Elder, he wrote the following. He wrote that Jerusalem was the most famous city in the East, not just Judea. So Jerusalem was the capital of Judea, but here we have this Roman historian author saying that Jerusalem was the most famous city in all of the East. So imagine all of the things that Jesus could have done. Imagine all the places in the city that he could have gone and all the places they could have found him. And maybe that's why it took them 3 days to find him, because they were looking everywhere and they should have just gone to church, because that's where he was, because that's where he wanted to be. Why did Jesus want to be at church? Well, it's not because like the temple had a cool youth room with a Nintendo Switch and foosball and sodas. Okay, that's not why he was there. He wasn't hanging out there. Jesus was at the temple because of the people who were there. And he was there with leaders of the Jewish faith, people who were eager to follow God. And a lot of people today, like, they don't want to go to church, and they consider church to be irrelevant because when you think of church, you think of old buildings with old traditions and people who are stuck in their ways. You may have grown up in a church like that. That may have been your religious experience when you were younger. But I believe today that church is a place where we can encounter something new. We can consider new ways to know God, new ways to grow in our relationship with God, new ways that we can share God's love with others, new ways that we can be a blessing to our communities and to our nation and to our world. And we're called to do those things together, to experience community together. And sometimes that happens in a church building, and sometimes that can happen in our homes, and sometimes it can even happen over a video call with other people. But 12-year-old Jesus understood the importance of spending time with people that were hungry for God and chasing after God. Let's keep going. Number 3, spend time with people outside of your peer group. In verse 46, we see that, they found him in the temple courts, and what was he doing? He was sitting among the teachers. They find Jesus hanging out at the temple with a bunch of adults. Again, consider all the people that Jesus could have been hanging out with in this massive city. It's not like there were no other 12-year-olds in the city that he could have been running around the streets with. But Jesus chose to be with these guys because even at an early age, Jesus knew the value of being with people at other stages in life and the things that he could learn from them. In this case, he's with, adults, teachers of the law. Adults, I would pray that you would follow the example of these teachers of the law and that you would be willing to invest some of your time into our younger generations and invest in them spiritually. And whether that's serving at the church or serving at your local school when schools get back in, or in your own house with your kids' friends, whatever it is, I pray that you would desire to invest in the spiritual future of our kids. And students, I pray that you would follow the example of Jesus and that you would desire to spend some time with people that are older than you, and not just your parents, because there is so much that you can learn from those who have already been through some of the things that you have been through. There's so much that you can learn, which brings us to the fourth way that you can act like 12-year-old Jesus, and that's to admit that you don't know it all. Admit you don't know it all. Again, Jesus is found in the temple, he's found with the teachers, and what does it say? That he's listening to them and he's asking them questions. Now here's where it gets a little bit curious, based on some of the things that we believe about God. We believe that Jesus is God. We also believe that God is omniscient, and that's just a fancy way of saying all-knowing. So God is all-knowing, and therefore Jesus must be all-knowing, because if Jesus is God and God is all-knowing, then Jesus must be all-knowing. If A equals B and B equals C, then A must equal C. That's basic math. But the question is, was 12-year-old Jesus omniscient? I don't know, because I'm not all-knowing myself, but I tend to believe that at this point in his life, Jesus was not omniscient. And there's plenty of places later on in the gospel, in his public ministry, where we see Jesus like he knows people's thoughts before they say anything. He knows what's going on in their hearts. But at age 12, we don't know if that's the way that he was. And so in this scenario, we see that Jesus wants to learn from these teachers because he's asking them questions. You don't ask questions of people if you don't want to learn from them. Okay, so he's asking them these questions, and I think we would be wise to follow that example of Jesus. Even 12-year-old Jesus, are we teachable? Are we willing to still be taught no matter what your age is? And I think all of us on the surface would say, absolutely, I am teachable. I always want to know more. I want to be able to grow. I want to listen. But when the rubber meets the road, are we really teachable? Or would we rather just kind of share the wisdom that we have with others, and we don't really take what others have to say quite as seriously? Like, oh, that's just like, are we really taking the time to listen and to learn from others? And it's interesting because here we have 12-year-old Jesus learning from the teachers of the law, and then later on when Jesus is older, who are the people that refused to listen to Jesus? It was the teachers of the law. And they missed out on so much because of their refusal to listen to Jesus. Thanks to Jesus, the good news is that we always have room to grow spiritually. I'm going to say that again. The good news is that we always have room to grow spiritually. Let's keep going. Number 5, engage in spiritual conversations. So not only do we see that Jesus is listening to them and asking questions, in verse 47 we see that everyone who heard him was amazed at his understanding and his answers. So Jesus is not just asking questions and listening, he is actively contributing to this conversation. And his answers are just wowing people. And while it would be nice if whenever we were engaged in spiritual conversations, while it would be nice if our answers just amazed everybody and floored them, that's not the goal of having spiritual conversations with somebody. It's not to wow somebody with your answers. The goal of a spiritual conversation is mutual growth, that we are helping one another grow in our faith, that we are going through God's word and studying it and asking questions about it and having debates sometimes and respectfully disagreeing with each other sometimes, as we desire to grow in our own relationship and help others grow in their relationship. And sometimes we shy away from spiritual conversations because we feel like, oh, I don't really have anything to contribute, and that's not true. It's not. Even if you have questions, and even if if you're not convinced, I'm not sure, it's still okay to be part of the conversation. And if you haven't had a whole lot of spiritual conversations and you want to be with a group of people that want to have these conversations, we want you to be part of a community group here at Rainier View or one of our Rooted groups. And we're really excited because in a couple of weeks, we're starting our next session of Rooted, which is a 10-week experience where you and other people that want to have some spiritual conversations based on God's word, can have those conversations, can participate in some unique prayer and service experiences together. And it's really, really good. But don't just take my word for it. I would recommend that go to our website, rainierview.org/rooted, and there's some things that you can read about Rooted, but I would actually recommend just scroll down, and there's a couple of videos at the bottom of that page, and just watch those videos and hear what other people's experiences are. Hear what they went through, hear how they were blessed by it, and then maybe read through it and decide if that's something that you want to do in a couple of weeks. Again, engaging in spiritual conversations is a great way for us to keep growing in our faith. All right, so we got 2 left. This next one, it's not as much about what we can learn from Jesus, but it's almost more of what we can learn from the parents of a 12-year-old, but I'm still going to count it for this list of 7. And that is number 6, being a parent is hard. Being a parent is hard, even if your kid is the Son of God. Okay, if you're a parent and you've ever lost a child in the grocery store or in a shopping mall or in church, like even if you lost them for 5 minutes, you've had what I like to call a heart attack moment where like palpitations and panic sets in and you start thinking the worst of like, oh no, they've been kidnapped and they're gonna lock me away like for losing my kid and what's going on. And even if you've lost them for 5 minutes, it feels like a lifetime. Now I want you to consider Mary and Joseph. 5 days. It took them 5 days from when they discovered that he wasn't with them to when they found him in the temple. Can you even imagine how they felt after those 5 days? Beyond frazzled, just ridiculous. And when they finally find Jesus, Mary's flipping out like, what? Why? Why did you do this to us, son? What? Why? And his answer is simply, really? You didn't know I was going to be here? I had to be in my Father's house. Oh, of course, he had to be in his Father's house. And again, this isn't Jesus' fault. This is clearly on Mary and Joseph for not keeping track of their son. And as a parent, it's hard and you're going to make mistakes. And sometimes, like Mary and Joseph, your kid is going to call you out on those mistakes. And so you've got a choice. Am I going to get angry and lash out and hurt my relationship with my child? Or can I use the opportunity to humbly admit the things that I've done wrong and to use it as a way to grow in your relationship with your child by learning from it? Parenting is hard. We need help. If you want help, we've got a resource that we highly recommend. There's an app, it's called ParentQ. Highly recommend, totally free app that you can go. There's a website as well that you can check out. And it's, again, full of great free articles and blogs and podcasts and all sorts of things that can help you. No matter whether you've got little kids or you've got college age students, there are articles and resources for you. And again, it's totally free. Don't be afraid to download it because we all need help when it comes to parenting because it's hard. Okay, last one, number 7. The last thing that we can learn today from 12-year-old Jesus is this. You need to honor your parents. Honor your parents. For Jesus, this meant obeying God as well as his earthly parents, Mary and Joseph. And we see in verse 51, the family goes back to Nazareth, and then we see that Jesus was obedient to them. Jesus, who was perfect in every way, Jesus, who had never committed sin, is obedient to his imperfect parents. Now, for the students watching right now, that's huge, okay? You may not think very much of your parents. Like you may not agree with a lot of the things that they ask you to do. But if Jesus, who was perfect, obeyed his parents, you don't really have an excuse not to listen to and obey your parents. And every parent watching right now is just like, yes, preach. But I'm telling you right now, unless your parents ask you to do something that is wrong or evil or sinful, like you've been called to obey, and that is what it means to honor your parents. And for those of you that are grown and out of your parents' house, it doesn't mean that you don't honor your parents anymore. That is a command that lasts, as long as we have that relationship on this earth, we are called to honor them. Now, that doesn't mean that you obey everything that they ask you to do like a child would. It also doesn't mean that you disregard your parents or ignore them and treat them like they're not part of your life anymore. You are still called to honor. There you go. There's 7 ways right there, 7 life lessons from 12-year-old Jesus. I'm not going to ask you to make these your 7 resolutions for the year 2021. I'm not going to ask you to do that, but what I would ask you to do is to consider this list. Pray over this list, maybe talk with somebody you trust about this list and start thinking about, okay, what's 1 or 2 of these things that I really want to start implementing in my life. Like maybe it's something that maybe I need to invest in some younger people, or maybe I need to, engage in some spiritual conversations and maybe be part of a rooted group, or maybe I just need to recognize that I need help in parenting. Okay, whatever it is, I want to encourage you to start talking to God about that and praying about that and taking some steps to grow in that area. Maybe you even want to print off a picture of 12-year-old you. And at the bottom of that picture, write down those things and how you want to imitate 12-year-old Jesus. Remember, the good news is that we always have room to grow spiritually. And so, friends, let's get out there and act like a 12-year-old.
Thank you so much for sharing with us today, Mike. We have so many opportunities for people of all ages, and we want to make sure that you're staying in the loop about it all. The best ways to do that is through our all-church emails, by following us on Instagram and Facebook, or check in anytime at rainierview.org. If you're new to Rainier View in the last few months, or are wondering who we are, where we've been, and where we are going as a church, then we want to invite you to discover Rainier View. This is a chance for you to meet some of our pastors, ask questions, and learn more about our church. If you're ready to dive in deeper with us, we would love to meet you on Zoom on Sunday, January 10th. Head to our website to get signed up and for all the details. Rooted is a 10-week experience to get you connected to God, the church, serving in our community, and discovering your purpose. It's not just another study or curriculum. It's a way to meet people and grow through deep conversations and learning to put into practice some important biblical rhythms into our lives. If you are looking to dive into a community group at Rainier View, this is the best way to do it. We want everyone here at Rainier View to take part in Rooted and witness the life change that can happen. Sign-ups are live right now for a winter session, which will start on January 19th. Please visit rainierview.org/rooted to sign up today. We are a church that loves to be generous. If you call Rainier View your church home, you can give by simply texting RVCC to 77977 to use our safe and secure online system. You can also give on our website or send in a check. If you're joining us for the first time today, please don't feel any obligation to give. We're just so glad that you're here. We'll be together for one last song today. During this song, we encourage you to take communion in your homes. This is just a time we take every week to dwell upon the sacrifice that Christ made for us. So gather some bread and juice and take these as reminders of Jesus' body and blood. Thank you again for joining us this morning, and we hope you'll join us again next Sunday right here or at one of our campuses.
When I survey the wondrous cross on which the Prince of Glory died, my richest gain I count but loss in poor contempt on all my pride. Oh, the wonderful cross! Oh, the wonderful cross! Bids me come and die and find that I may truly live. Oh, the wonderful cross. Oh, the wonderful cross. All who gather here by grace draw near and bless your name. See from his head, his hands, his feet, sorrow and love pouring down. your name. And oh, the wonderful cross, oh, the wonderful cross bids me come and die and find that I may truly live. No, the wonderful cross, oh, the wonderful cross, all who gather here by grace draw near and bless your name.